"Get out!" That was the first thing Laura Scott shrieked, her voice tearing through the calm evening like a warning siren. I had barely set down the first moving box in what was supposed to be my new home, a place I had legally purchased, fair and square. A place that, unknown to her, wasn't even within her beloved hoe's reach. But that didn't stop her. She stormed up the sidewalk, waving a leather folder like it was a weapon, barking about unpaid dues, threatening massive fines, and insisting I pack my things and leave immediately. Neighbors stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. What she didn't realize was that her tirade was the beginning of her own downfall. "Tell me, what would you have done?" I never expected moving back to my grandmother's house on Lake Maplewood would feel like walking into a war zone. My name is Jake Rogers. I am 42 years old. After years of grinding as an IT consultant, I finally had enough savings, plus my inheritance, to settle down. My grandmother, Rose, had left me her cedar-sided lake cottage. It was rustic, charming, with a creaky wraparound porch and a small dock stretching into the water. To me, it was more than proper. It was the heart of my childhood summers, where I caught frogs, fished for bass, and listened to Grandma's stories about how the lake never forgets. I used to think she was just being poetic. I had no idea how true those words were. When my wife, Tracy, and I decided to leave the city, the timing felt perfect. She was pregnant with our first child, and both of us longed for peace. Tracy had spent years teaching high school, corralling teenagers, breaking up fights, and grading essays at our kitchen table until midnight. She deserved mornings filled with quiet sunlight over the lake more than anyone I knew. Because of her pregnancy, she was already exhausted and queasy most days. So when we finally got the keys to Grandma's cottage, I told her to rest while I handled the heavy lifting. Of course, Tracy resisted, as she's not the type to sit back when there's work to be done. But when I reminded her that staying healthy was what mattered most, she reluctantly agreed. The neighborhood looked like something out of a real estate ad at first glance. Trimmed lawns, colorful flower beds, American flags fluttering in the breeze, and children pedaling down wide streets. Everyone smiled and waved as we pulled in with the moving truck. Everyone except one woman. She stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, arms crossed, lips tied like she'd bitten into something bitter. Her blonde bob stayed perfectly still, even in the wind. Everything about her posture screamed, "I run this place." That was Laura Scott, president of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. Though I didn't yet understand the full weight of that title, from the moment I started unloading boxes, I felt her eyes burning into me. I offered her a polite smile. She didn't return it. Instead, she marched straight toward me, heels tapping like tiny hammers on concrete. "Excuse me," she said sharply, "are you the new owner?" I nodded and introduced myself. Her expression hardened at my last name, Rogers. I could practically see her filing it away in her mental list of outsiders. Then, with a smug grin, she thrust a thick envelope into my hands. "Welcome to Oak Ridge. Here's your initiation paperwork. Annual dues are $270,000, payable within 30 days. I nearly dropped the box I was carrying. $270,000? I actually laughed out loud. That's more than I paid for my first house. You can't be serious. But she wasn't joking. She tapped the envelope against her palm like a judge striking a gavel. "This is Oak Ridge," she sniffed. "We don't tolerate rule breakers, nonconformists, or undesirables." The way she lingered on that last word made my jaw clench. I looked at Tracy, standing on the porch with her hand on her belly. I didn't want her stressed. I set down the box and tried to keep my voice calm. "Actually, I don't think this property is in your HOA. My grandmother lived here for decades, and she never paid dues." Laura's eyes flashed with a dangerous mix of excitement and rage. She yanked a folded document from her folder and shoved it in my face. "See, it's all here. This is our community, and you will follow our rules. Don't make me involve the authorities." I scanned the paper. It looked official, with seals and signatures, but something felt off. The address listed Maplewood Avenue. My house was on Maplewood Drive, just a few feet across the property line, but legally, it made all the difference. Before I could point it out, I heard Tracy gasp. I turned just in time to see her clutching the porch railing, face pale, her other hand gripping her belly. She doubled over, wincing. "Jake," she whispered, her voice tight with pain. My heart dropped. I rushed to her side, dropping the box on the porch with a crash of breaking ceramic. "Are you okay?" She shook her head, sweat gathering on her forehead. "It hurts." A broken bar. The baby. Her knees buckled, and before I could react, she collapsed into my arms, unconscious. For a second, I froze, and my wife limp against me, and then Laura's voice sliced through the moment. "Oh my God, she's faking it. I told you people don't belong here." She screeched into her phone, already calling someone. I didn't know if it was her nephew Derek, a friend, or the police. None of it mattered. My world tilted. Tracy's skin was pale, her breath shallow. I knew I had to get her to the hospital fast. I scooped her up and sprinted for the car. Behind me, Laura's shrill voice echoed across the lake. "You'll regret this, Jake Rogers." I slammed the car door and sped toward the gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of the first shot fired in a war that would turn this quiet lakeside neighborhood into the stage for the sweetest downfall I would ever witness. The drive to the hospital is a blur. I just remember my hands trembling, my eyes darting between the road and Tracy, who was pale and clutching her belly, whispering through the pain that she'd be fine even though the fear in her eyes said otherwise. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. We'd moved here seeking peace, a break from city stress. And on our very first day, we were already rushing to the thanks to a neighbor who couldn't leave well enough alone. I thought to myself, if anything happens to my wife or baby because of this woman, I'll never forgive her. Hours later, after doctors assured me the baby was safe but warned Tracy needed strict bed rest, I finally let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Sitting at her hospital bedside, I promised her I would take care of everything else. No stress, no lifting, no hoe battles. That was my job now. Tracy gave me a faint smile, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "Don't let that woman bully you. She feeds on fear." Her tone carried a quiet strength, the kind that came from being a colonel's daughter raised to stand her ground, never easily intimidated. I kissed her forehead and nodded, but inside I was burning. Laura had stepped far over the line, and there was no coming back from it. When I returned to the house, the moving truck was gone, but so was the peace I had hoped for. My neighbor, Mike Clark, was standing in my driveway, holding his phone like it was evidence in a trial. Mike had a knack for being in the right place at the right time, and this time, it worked in my favor. He had recorded Laura screaming into her phone while I was struggling to rush Tracy to the car. He didn't even need to speak. He just held the phone up and pressed play. Laura's shrill voice echoed again. "She's faking it. She's trespassing. Get someone here now before she causes trouble." Hearing it from a third-party perspective made my blood boil even hotter. This wasn't neighborhood bickering anymore. This was harassment, slander, maybe even something that endangered my wife and unborn child. Mike placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "I've lived here 5 years, man. She does this to everyone." My parents? She tried to fine them for hanging red lanterns during Lunar New Year. Said it clashed with the neighborhood's aesthetic. His smile was tight, but the fire in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. People are afraid of her, but just so you know, not all of us are on her side. That was the first moment I realized Laura's so-called empire wasn't as untouchable as she made it seem. If Mike loathed her this much, maybe others did too. I thanked him, told him we'd keep in touch, and went back inside to unpack the few boxes I'd managed to carry in before everything went sideways. The next morning, as I was arranging boxes outside, Laura showed up again, this time with her nephew, Derek. He was a tall, broad-shouldered guy who looked like he could play linebacker, but something about the way he kept looking at the ground told me he wasn't entirely comfortable with his role. Laura, on the other hand, was in full tyrant mode. "I see you tried sneaking out last night," she smirked, "but we'll be watching. You think you are clever, moving into a house that skirts the rules? The hoe doesn't tolerate loopholes." Her word choice almost made me laugh. Loopholes. She had just admitted she knew my house might not even fall under her jurisdiction. Instead of laughing, I kept my voice even. "Laura, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this house is mine, and I'm not signing anything." Her face twitched, and Derek shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us as if he wanted to say something but didn't dare. That moment stuck with me all day. Laura didn't just want compliance, she wanted control. This wasn't about rules or dues. It was about making sure everyone, even newcomers, bent the knee. And Derek Brokenbar, the way he avoided her gaze told me he wasn't all in. I'd read about HOAs attracting power-hungry personalities, but Laura elevated it to obsession. Her rigid devotion to rules, her smug superiority, even the way she spat out the word undesirably, it all painted the picture of someone desperate to dominate. Later that afternoon, while lugging furniture upstairs, I got a call from the hospital. Tracy had been discharged earlier than expected, with strict instructions to rest. I rushed to pick her up, relieved she was stable but still seeing the strain in her eyes. On the drive home, she tried to ease the tension with a joke. "Imagine our kid growing up here, having to deal with that woman every day. I'll need to teach evasive maneuvers before they even learn to walk." I laughed, but deep down, I knew she was right. Laura wasn't finished, and for the sake of my wife and unborn child, I'd have to be prepared. That evening, just as I had settled Tracy with pillows and water in the living room, there was a sharp knock at the door. I opened it to find Derek standing there. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, his body language nervous. Gone was the enforcer stance from earlier. "Hey," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry about yesterday." I didn't know she was going to call anyone. I studied him carefully. He was Laura's nephew, her so-called right hand. But in that moment he looked more like a kid dragged into something he hadn't asked for. "She doesn't give you much of a choice, does she?" I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked me straight in the eye. "You have no idea," he said. Then he glanced back over his shoulder, as Derek headed toward Laura's place. He lowered his voice and warned, "Be careful. She doesn't take losing well." Before I could question him, he turned away, leaving me frozen at the doorway. I leaned back against the door, staring at the empty space he just walked through. His words confirmed what I already feared. Laura wasn't finished with us. If her own nephew was cautioning me, then whatever came next would make that ridiculous invoice look harmless. I glanced over at Tracy, curled on the sofa with her hand resting gently on her belly, and I silently promised myself that moving into my grandmother's home wasn't just about settling Ina, it was about bracing for battle. The next morning carried a different weight, something thick and unspoken in the air. When I stepped out to grab the newspaper from the end of the driveway, I caught three neighbors across the street pause mid-conversation and glance at me before looking away. One whispered, and the others leaned in, huddling together. It felt like high school all over again, at the uneasy moment when everyone knows a rumor about you before you've even heard it yourself. I tried ignoring it, but their sideways look sent a chill down my spine. By midday, the whispers had turned into a steady hum. At the local cafe copyright, the usual barista who chatted about football and weather slid my coffee across the counter without meeting my eyes. When I finally asked what was going on, she leaned closer, almost apologetic. "Word is, Laura's called an emergency home meeting. People are saying she plans to make an example of you." She bit her lip, as if repeating it aloud might summon Laura herself. My stomach knotted, but I managed a polite thanks before heading back. On the drive home, I noticed clusters of residents standing in their yards, murmuring nervously. A neighbor 2 doors down waved me over, his voice low and uneasy. "Jakey, a broken bar, is it true? Is she really trying to kick you out?" There was fear beneath his words, the kind that comes when you realize the rules you've trusted might be a complete illusion. "That's what she's claiming," I admitted. "But my grandmother left me the paperwork. I've kept it safe." He nodded slowly, though his face remained troubled. "If she can go after you, then she can come for any of us." His wife tugged on his sleeve, whispering urgently, "Don't say too much out here." By late afternoon, the gossip had hardened into a narrative. Some claimed Laura had found a loophole in the property records. Others swore she had a team of city lawyers lined up to force me out. A few whispered she was backed by powerful people, the kind who never lose. I wanted to dismiss it all as neighborhood panic, but after the fake cops, the endless fines, and her brazen arrogance, it didn't feel impossible. When I told Tracy, she pressed her hand against her stomach, frowning. So she's dragging you in front of everyone tomorrow? I nodded grimly. She wants blood of mine. She needs to reassert her control. Tracy leaned against the counter, eyes sharp despite her fatigue. Then be ready. You've got the facts. You've got your grandmother's deed. Don't let her twist this into another one of her stories. Her tired smile carried more strength than any speech. You faced her before. You can face her again. That night, Mike showed up on my porch with a six-pack and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. You've gone viral, he whispered, careful of listening ears. Everyone saw the clip of her losing it in your driveway. People are furious, Jake. Some want to tear the whole hoe down. Others are terrified, since they've been paying her off for years. He cracked open a beer and sighed. It's chaos, man. But chaos is your ally right now. You've got momentum. I stared out at the lake, its surface shimmering under the moonlight, trying to believe him. Not long after, Derek returned, skulking in the shadows, hands buried in his pockets, eyes darting nervously. She's not finished, he muttered. I know my aunt. She's humiliated, and she doesn't forgive. She's telling people you forged everything. She says tomorrow's meeting will settle it for good. His voice cracked. She told me I'd better back her up or I'll regret it. I studied him, weighing his guilt. But the slump of his shoulders, the hollow in his eyes said they felt genuine. You've already started doing the right thing, I said quietly. You don't have to be her shadow anymore. Just keep standing here. He gave a bitter laugh. You think they'll ever forgive me? Half of them want me gone too. Maybe not today, I told him, but if you keep choosing what's right over fear, they'll see it. He held my gaze for a long moment before giving a faint, reluctant nod. The following day, the community center overflowed with people. Folding chairs scraped loudly against the tile as neighbors crowded for seats. The air reeked of perfume, coffee, tension, and old carpet. I stood at the back, my grandmother's deed secure in its folder, heart pounding but mind steady. Then Laura made her entrance, strutting to the podium in one of her bold suits, pearls glittering in the light. This time, she carried not her usual binder, but a sleek leather folder stuffed with documents. Her smile stretched wide, triumphant, as if her arrest fiasco had never happened. With a loud slam, she dropped the folder onto the podium. Last week, she began, her voice echoing across the packed room, a certain trespasser humiliated this community a broken bar. He even had the nerve to suggest his supposed inheritance put him above the very rules the rest of us follow, Laura announced, pointing at me with a fury that lit her eyes like flint. Neighbors, she continued, tonight I will reveal the truth. I will show you proof that this man's house, this cottage of lies, has always been part of Oak Ridge. When you see the facts, you'll understand. No one, not even him, is above this association. She jabbed a finger toward me, rage darkening the edges of her smile. The room shifted. People squirmed in their chairs, folding their arms or leaning in to murmur. A woman near the front muttered under her breath, "She's at it again." Laura didn't pause. Her voice rose with every word. "Tomorrow," she declared, "if he refuses to comply, I will make sure the authorities remove him personally. This community will not tolerate fraud. We will not tolerate deception. We will not tolerate outsiders pretending to belong." Her warnings hung in the air like a choking haze. 100 eyes bore into my chest, waiting to see whether I would crack. I drew in a slow, steadying breath. This wasn't idle gossip anymore. She had turned the meeting into a public trial, and if I didn't show up prepared the next day, I'd be standing before these same faces with her avalanche of so-called evidence bearing down on me. The deed from my grandmother rested heavy in my hands. The paper crinkled as I tightened my grip. I couldn't see what Laura had in that leather folder, but I knew one thing for certain: if she thought she'd already won, she was about to be surprised. The meeting dissolved into a uproar, neighbors shouting, Laura shrieking, Derek staring at the floor like a man pulled in two directions. I slipped out into the night, mind racing. Cicadas hummed in the trees and the humid air clung to my shirt. As I walked home under the moonlight, Grandma Rose's words circled in my head. The lake remembers everything. Maybe, I hoped, the lake would remember for me. Back at the house, I closed the door, pressed my back against it, and let out a shaky breath. The silence inside felt heavy, not comforting, full of the echo of Laura's threat. I thought of Tracy upstairs, resting with a hand on her stomach, and of my neighbors who now looked to me as if I had all the answers. I thought of the USB tucked in my drawer, waiting. Tomorrow would be the true test. I killed the lights, climbed the stairs, and slid into bed beside Tracy. She stirred, opened her eyes for a moment, and whispered, "You're ready." I kissed her forehead more to reassure myself than her. Outside, the shore wind picked up, ruffling the trees. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. All I could hear was Laura's voice from the hall, sharp, venomous, promising, "Tomorrow, I'll make sure he's gone." For the first time I wondered if I was really prepared. When the so-called officers had left my porch without even glancing inside, I produced my deed and watched them retreat down the drive, shoulders stiff, having realized they'd been summoned for nothing. Laura, of course, spun the moment to her advantage for the crowd on the sidewalk. "See," she shouted across the hedges, holding the leather folder aloft like a talisman. "He's tricky. He thinks he's smarter than the rest of us. But I have the documents." A few neighbors applauded nervously, afraid to do otherwise. Mike recorded the scene from his lawn with a sly smile. Derek lingered behind his aunt, hands jammed in his pockets, a more reluctant bodyguard than proud enforcer. For an instant his eyes flicked toward me, and there was something like doubt there. That tiny crack was all I needed to pry at. Over the next week Laura ramped up the pressure. Every morning brought a new pastel-colored notice taped to my door, each one a hair higher than the last, as if height lent them extra legitimacy. First a $100 fine for an untidy hedge, then $200 for parking the truck at an improper angle. By Thursday she'd slapped a $500 non-compliance fee on me for leaving moving boxes by the curb. I almost admired the creativity of Ida if it weren't so malicious. Tracy, still on strict bed rest, tried to remain calm, but each time she glimpsed Laura's smug face outside the window her fingers tightened on the blanket. "She's obsessed with us," she muttered. "It's not about the neighborhood, it's about power." We both knew the truth. The problem was how to prove it. While sorting through Grandma Rose's old file cabinets one afternoon, I found a set of carefully labeled folders of property deeds. Maplewood Drive. Inside was the original deed, complete with county stamps and signatures. I flipped through yellowed pages until I found the survey map. The property line for my house stopped precisely 6 inches short of the HOA boundary. 6 inches. That tiny strip of land was the reason Laura had no legal claim over this place. I sat back and felt the irony hit hard. Grandma Rose had known exactly what she was doing when she bought this lot. Rose never did anything by accident. I wanted to burst outside and wave the map at Laura, but Tracy's voice kept me steady. "Don't let her bully you. Be smart, be patient." So I called Mike. He arrived in minutes, a phone in hand, and we spread the deed and survey on the kitchen table. His finger traced the line. His eyes widened. "This means she's got nothing on you," he whispered. He leaned back, whistling softly. "If others saw this, they'd flip. Half the neighborhood has been paying those fake dues out of fear. If she can't even enforce them against you, maybe she's been bluffing the whole time." A grin tugged at my face. "Exactly. The Queen may be ruling over a much smaller kingdom than she believes." But Laura didn't stop there. The next Friday morning I found something taped to my door that was not another petty violation. It was the next morning, taped to my front door, wasn't just another pastel-colored violation. It was a full-blown invoice. $2,700 in unpaid HOA dues. The kicker sat in bold red letters: "Final notice. Failure to pay will result in legal action." And just below that, scrawled in Laura's unmistakable all-caps handwriting, "Consider this your last warning, Jake." I held it up for Tracy to see. She rolled her eyes. "She really thinks she owns this place," she said. "Jake, she's bluffing. She doesn't know what you know. You have the paperwork. Let her dig her own grave." I wanted to believe her, but Laura's persistence gnawed at me. She wasn't the type to stop until she got what she wanted, or until someone finally stopped her. That evening, while I watered the front plants, I noticed Derek lingering near the sidewalk. His expression was torn, guilt flickering behind his eyes. "Your aunt seems determined," I said, testing the waters. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. "She's just trying to protect the neighborhood," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. He shifted again, looked like he wanted to add something, then clamped his mouth shut. I filed that moment away. Something was eating at him, And sooner or later, it might work in my favor. When the day of the home meeting finally arrived, the entire neighborhood packed into the community center. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, the scent every rented hall seems to carry. Folding chairs scraped loudly against linoleum as people settled in. Some whispered nervously, others glared at me like I'd declared war on their manicured lawns. Laura strutted to the podium, her pearls glittering under the fluorescent light. She tapped the microphone like she was presiding over the Supreme Court instead of a room of homeowners with Costco name tags. "Order, order," she barked, flipping through papers in her binder like a TV lawyer preparing her case. "Neighbors, we have a problem," she began. "A man has moved into our community who refuses to comply with the rules we all agreed to uphold. He thinks he's above us. He thinks he doesn't have to pay his fair share." Well, she held up the leather folder with a smug flourish. "I have here the official documentation proving his property is under the authority of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association." She slapped the page down with a theatrical thud. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I raised my hand calmly. "May I?" I asked, stepping forward. Laura hesitated but handed it over, convinced she had me cornered. I lifted the page high for the crowd to see, angling it under the harsh fluorescent light. "This is the page she's talking about," I said evenly. "It looks very official, doesn't it? But let me point something out." I tapped my finger against the text. "Do you all see this?" The line read, "Maplewood Avenue." "That's not this street. We live on Maplewood Drive." Gasps rippled through the room. A man in the back muttered, "Wait, isn't Avenue across the highway?" Another whispered, "So she's been finding the wrong house this whole time?" Laura's face went pale for the first time since I'd met her. She snatched the page back like it had burned her fingers, eyes darting over the line I'd exposed. "It's just a typo," she stammered, voice cracking. "Don't be ridiculous. Everyone knows this property is ours to regulate, don't they?" She searched the room, desperate for support, but this time the neighbors weren't nodding. They were frowning. Derek crossed his arms, jaw working. His phone was out too, though he held it low, as if he didn't want her to notice. I stepped back, heart hammering but voice steady. "A typo that changes the entire address. A typo that lets her fine you for things she has no legal authority to control. My grandmother always said this property was free from HOA nonsense." I didn't believe her until I saw the deed. And now, thanks to these, I tapped the binder. We all know the truth. Laura's been bluffing. The room erupted, the neighbors whispering, muttering, glaring at Laura, some in shock, others furious. Laura's composure cracked for only a heartbeat. Then she forced a smile, lifted her chin, and slammed her hand against the podium. "This meeting is not over," she snapped, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you are clever, Jake Rogers, but I have proof. And soon, the entire neighborhood, you'll all see what kind of liar he really is." Laura sneered, snapping her fingers at Derek. He looked like he wished the ground would swallow him whole. After a long pause, he reluctantly pulled a thick manila envelope from under his arm and handed it over. Laura clutched it like a prize. Her eyes gleamed with triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, savoring every word, "I hold in my hands the evidence that will end this farce once and for all. When you see what I know, you'll be begging me to throw this trespasser out of our community." The room went dead silent, every gaze fixed on the envelope. My pulse hammered in my ears, my palm slick against my grandmother's deed. Tracy's warning echoed in my head, and I stole a glance toward the back of the room. Mike stood there, phone up, recording everything. Derek shifted nervously at Laura's side, his face pale. I had the truth about the address, but Laura clearly thought she was holding something bigger. And as she began pulling the papers out with theatrical slowness, a dread settled in my chest. This was about to get ugly. Laura raised the envelope like it was a smoking gun. That smug smile stretched across her face, the kind that made my jaw clench. The room was still reeling from my Avenue versus Drive reveal, but Laura wasn't about to surrender her throne. "This," she declared, brandishing a stack of papers, "is the original community charter, notarized, stamped, and proving beyond doubt that this entire stretch of lakefront, including his so-called cottage, belongs under Oak Ridge jurisdiction." She jabbed a manicured finger toward me. The crowd gasped, some nodded, others frowned, but everyone leaned in, caught in the drama. I forced myself to step closer, voice calm despite the weight of every eye in the room. "If that's true, Laura," I said evenly, "then why hasn't this house been built once in over 30 years? My grandmother kept every scrap of paper. She was meticulous. Not a single invoice, not a single notice until you came along." A ripple of murmur swept through the neighbors. Someone whispered, "He's got a point." Others looked uneasy, torn between fear of Laura and the logic of my words. Laura slammed her palm on the podium. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "Because your grandmother got away with it, and I won't let you get away with it too." Her voice wavered, sharp with desperation. Behind her, Derek shifted again, sweat beaded on his forehead. Even he didn't look convinced anymore. I drew out my grandmother's deed, holding it steady. "Here's the problem with your so-called charter, Laura. It's from 1972. This deed is from 1981 and it says Maplewood Drive, not Avenue. The boundary line ends 6 inches short of your HOA territory. You can wave your binder all night, but it won't change the truth." I handed the document to a neighbor, who passed it along gingerly, as if it might burn their hands. Heads bent over the page, whispers grew louder, and the tension in the room thickened until it was hard to breathe. "She's been bleeding us dry," a man muttered. "Maybe we've all been wrong," a woman whispered. For the first time, Laura's carefully polished mask cracked. Her smile twisted into a snarl. She turned on Derek. "Call them," she hissed. He froze, eyes darting between me and her. "Now," she snapped. Reluctantly, he pulled out his phone. I couldn't hear his words, but I knew exactly who he was calling. Not the rent-a-cops she paraded around before Rhea this time. It was the real police. The neighbors stirred uneasily, glancing at one another. Tracy's warning replayed in my mind. She doesn't lose gracefully. And now, she was about to weaponize law enforcement as her last resort. By the time I made it home, Tracy was curled on the couch, hand resting on her belly, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen her. I told her everything of the charter, the deed, Laura summoning the cops. Her face drained of color, but she took my hand. "Jake," she whispered, "don't let her see you break. People like her feed off weakness. Promise me you'll stand tall." I nodded, squeezing her hand, but inside, fury boiled. Laura had crossed every line imaginable. Now she was trying to turn real police into her personal hit squad. And with Tracy carrying our child, I couldn't let her games drag us down any further. The knock came just after sunset. Heavy, deliberate, one of those knocks that drops your stomach before you even reach the door. 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch, badges glinting under the light. One tall and broad, the other younger but rigid with seriousness. Behind them, neighbors had gathered like spectators at a play. And there, right at the curb, stood Laura, pearls shining, binder clutched like scripture, face glowing with smug satisfaction. "That's him!" she shrieked. "Arrest the trespasser." "Mr. Rogers?" the older officer asked. I nodded, heart pounding. "We've had reports of trespassing and unlawful occupancy. We'll need to see your paperwork." I handed over my grandmother's deed, forcing my hands to remain steady. "This is my home," I said firmly, "inherited from my grandmother, paid in full, never under the hoe." The officer studied the document, frowning. Then he glanced at his partner. "This matches county records," he murmured. Relief surged through me until Laura's shriek split the night like glass shattering. "He's lying. Those papers are forged. He's a squatter. Arrest him." The younger officer shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "Ma'am, please calm down." But Laura stormed forward, waving her binder like a sword. "I am the president of this association, and I demand you remove him immediately. He's a danger to this community." Your accusations hung in the air, absurd yet venomous. The crowd buzzed with whispers, some rolling their eyes, others muttering, "She's lost it." Behind her, Derek stood rigid, jaw locked, phone halfway out of his pocket as if he wanted to record but couldn't summon the courage. His loyalty was slipping, and she was too blinded by rage to notice. The officers exchanged a glance. One exhaled and turned back to me. "Sir, until this is clarified, we'll need you to step outside." My pulse thundered in my ears. I knew they were only doing their jobs, but the thought of leaving Tracy alone inside chilled me. From the living room, her voice called weakly, "Jakey, a broken bar. What's happening?" I turned. She stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame, the other clutching her belly, her face twisted with pain. Then she gasped, "Jakia, it's the baby." My blood froze. Gasps rippled through the neighbors, the whole street falling silent. The officer's expression shifted instantly from suspicion to alarm. "Sir," one said sharply, "we need an ambulance now." I spun back to Tracy, my heart breaking. She doubled over, trembling, breath ragged. Outside, Laura kept shouting, demanding they drag me out, her voice shrill and venomous. But inside, my wife was collapsing in pain, our unborn child's future hanging in the balance. Fury and fear rooted me in the doorway, knowing this moment would change everything and that the real battle was only beginning. The next minutes blurred into chaos, burned into memory like slow motion. Tracy clutched the frame so tightly her knuckles turned white, her skin pale, sweat streaming. The officers dropped their suspicion instantly. One barked into his radio for an ambulance, the other rushed past me to steady her. I scooped her into my arms, laying her gently on the couch. "Hold on, Tracy," I whispered, even as fear shredded me inside. From the driveway came Laura's piercing voice, "Don't fall for it. She's faking again. That woman's a manipulator." The words made my stomach turn. My wife gasped for air, our child possibly in danger, and Laura still spun her fantasy of control. Neighbors gathered in clusters at the curb, shocked murmurs drifting through the night. "She's gone too far. Can't she see that poor woman's pregnant?" Laura paced, phone to her ear, barking more accusations to anyone who'd listen. Within minutes, flashing red and white lights washed across the neighborhood. Paramedics rushed inside, equipment thumping against the floor. They swarmed Tracy with efficient urgency, firing questions at me. "How far along? Any complications before? When did the pain start?" I clutched her hand, trying to answer, my voice trembling as I whispered that everything would be okay. Outside, Laura's screech rose above the sirens. "You see? She'll fake anything to avoid paying dues," one paramedic muttered under his breath. "What the hell is wrong with that woman?" The officers kept their focus on Tracy, but I caught one hard glance at the doorway. Their patience with Laura had snapped. The medics lifted Tracy onto a gurney, strapping her in carefully. I bent down, kissed her forehead, and promised I'd be right behind her. Her weak squeeze told me she believed me. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Sirens wailed into the night. One officer lingered. He handed me my deed. "Sir, there's no sign of trespassing here. Your paperwork matches county records." He cast a look toward the street where Laura was still ranting. "We'll be filing a report. This has escalated well beyond a neighborly dispute." His partner leaned closer, voice low. "Off the record, don't let her push you. She crossed the line tonight." Their words gave little comfort, but at least they weren't fooled. I followed the ambulance to the hospital. Hours blurred into days as I sat by Tracy's bed, monitors beeping softly. Doctors reassured me she and the baby were stable, but warned she needed strict rest and zero stress. As she finally drifted into exhausted sleep, I sat in the chair, fists clenched, fury simmering. I had come here seeking peace, and instead Laura had nearly destroyed us. That was the moment I made the promise. This wasn't just about standing tall anymore, it was about ending her reign. When I finally returned home, dawn was breaking, casting the neighborhood in pale gray. The house felt emptier than ever, shadows stretching long across the floor. The morning light spilled across the floorboards, cold and gray. On the porch, taped crookedly to the frame, was yet another envelope. I ripped it open and almost laughed at the audacity. A new FINEA, this time for $5,000 written unmistakably in Laura's handwriting. Beneath the typed lines, she had scrawled in thick red marker, "Last chance." The laugh stuck in my throat. This wasn't petty anymore, it was cruelty, sharpened and deliberate. Mike showed up soon after, phone in hand as usual. He studied me, shook his head, and muttered, "She doesn't even care your wife was taken away in an ambulance." I caught every word she screamed while Tracy was being loaded in. "When the neighbors see this, they'll start questioning her so-called leadership." He slipped a flash drive from his pocket and pressed it into my palm. "Keep this safe," he said with a dry grin, "in case she tries to rewrite history again." I tucked it into my jacket as if it were gold because, to me, it was. By the next day, my anger refused to stay buried. I confronted Laura directly. She was in her yard pruning roses, every snap of her shears sharp and deliberate, like she imagined cutting throats instead of stems. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, standing outside her picket fence. "You've seen the deed. You know I don't owe you anything. Why keep pushing?" She didn't even lift her head, her voice flat and cold. "Because order matters. People like you think you can waltz in and do whatever you please. Not here. I built Oak Ridge, and I'll burn it down before I let someone like you take it from me." There was no remorse in her words, only obsession. This wasn't about money anymore, it was about her hunger for control, and it had devoured her completely. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with copies of her documents spread before me. Bogus invoices and fabricated charges told a story I couldn't yet piece together. My mind spun with how deep her corruption might reach when a knock rattled the door. Derek stood there, tense, his eyes darting like he feared she might appear behind him any second. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice low. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He didn't see her. He hovered, rubbing the back of his neck, jaw clenched. "I don't agree with what she did last night," he muttered finally. "Your wife, yeah, she looked like she was in real pain, and my aunt just kept screaming. She's lost it, Jake." For the first time, I believed him. "Then help me stop her," I pressed. "You know what she's planning?" He bit his lip, torn, eyes shifting toward the door as if Laura's shadow stretched into the house. After a long silence, he moved quickly, pulling a small USB drive from his jacket and pressing it into my hand. His gaze burned with intensity. "I shouldn't be giving you this," he whispered. "But you need to see it before she destroys you. She's been funneling money through accounts no one knows about. This drive has it all." My pulse raced. "Why give it to me?" He swallowed, glanced at the floor, then toward the door. "Because I can't watch her do this anymore. But be careful. She'll know it came from me." And then he slipped into the night, leaving me with a tiny piece of plastic that carried the weight of a wrecking ball. I turned it over in my hand. Somewhere inside it was proof, and not just that Laura had crossed the line with me, but that she'd been scamming the entire neighborhood. My stomach churned, but fire coursed through my veins. Tracy's words echoed in my mind. "Don't let her bully you. Make sure everyone else sees it." The war Laura had declared was about to meet its answer, and Derek had just harmed me. That night, when I finally plugged the drive into my laptop, I understood its weight. Folders upon folders filled the screen, spreadsheets, PDFs, scanned receipts, and buried within them, a file header glared back at me. Maplewood Holdings LLC. Inside were bank transfers that painted a far darker picture than I had imagined. Line after line confirmed I'd thousands of dollars siphoned away, funneled straight from HODUs into personal accounts. Every transaction stamped with Laura's signature. Another folder exposed consulting fees to companies that didn't even exist. Invoices built from blank templates padded with absurd numbers. She hadn't just targeted me, she'd been draining the entire neighborhood for years, disguising theft as legitimate expenses. Every check written for landscaping or sidewalk repairs had been feeding Laura's private empire. The neon jogging suits, the pearls, the catered whole lunch, and so suddenly, every piece of her lavish lifestyle snapped into focus. My fury burned hotter, but underneath it pulsed something sharp of indication. She wasn't merely a bully, she was a criminal. The next morning, I laid everything out for Mike. He scrolled through the files, eyes widening, and let out a low whistle. "She's finished," he said, shaking his head. "You drop this at the right moment, she'll implode faster than you can say HOA bylaws." He slipped his phone back into his pocket, then grinned. "And the best part? I've still got all of the videos of her screaming about Tracy faking it. Pure gold. People will eat it alive." For the first time since moving back, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe finally the tide was shifting. The following week's home meeting was like a staged production, and Laura walked in as if she were the star. She strutted into the community center with Derek trailing behind, her binder clutched tight like a shield. But this time she carried something new, a sleek tablet. "Tonight," she declared, her voice thick with triumph, "we're broadcasting live to the entire neighborhood. Everyone will finally see what a fraud Jake Rogers really is. Everyone will witness me expose him." She propped the tablet on the podium, the little red camera light blinking at the crowd. I almost laughed at the irony. She thought streaming her tantrum would cement her control, but all she was really doing was setting the stage for her own collapse. At the back, Mike was already rolling on his phone, capturing a second angle. Derek stood beside her, stiff as a board, arms crossed, his face strained between dread and disgust. Our eyes met, and this time he didn't look away. Laura launched into her performance, every word sharp and rehearsed. This man is a liar, he forged his deed, he refuses to pay his dues like every responsible homeowner here does. He is a danger to our community, and I will not stand by while he tears apart everything I've built. She's been tearing this place apart, Laura snarled, slamming her binder down so hard the podium rattled. The crowd stirred as some nodded, others glanced at me with uneasy looks. I rose slowly, the USB drive clutched in my hand. Funny you should mention tearing things apart, I said so everyone could hear, because that's precisely what you've been doing to this community. A collective intake of breath swept the room. Laura's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about, she snapped. Calmly, I plugged the drive into the community center's projector. The screen behind her bloomed to life with spreadsheets and bank statements. Her signatures crawled across page after page. These are your transfers, I told them, steady as I could. HOA dues rooted into a company that doesn't exist. Money meant for sidewalks and playgrounds spent on pearls and vacations. The room erupted. Neighbors leapt to their feet, pointing and shouting. I paid $10,000 for landscaping last year. Where did that go? Someone demanded. Another voice shouted about supposed pool repairs that never happened. Laura's mask shattered. Her voice squealed, desperate and thin. You ungrateful lot. I built this community. I kept you safe. I deserve what I've taken. Her words spilled out raw and unfiltered, broadcasting live to every tablet and laptop in Oak Ridge. I glanced at Mikey. He nodded and gave me a discreet thumbs up. The red recording light blinked on. Laura realized too late what was happening. She lunged for the tablet, scrambling and shouting into the camera, "You think you can take this from me? Throw me out of the thing I created? I'll destroy every last one of you before I give up my power." Her voice cracked. Sweat shone on her brow under the fluorescent lights. Phones came out across the room, some neighbors backing away, others filming. Then Derek stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Enough, Aunt Laura," he spoke loud enough for the mic to catch. "You've been lying to everyone. I've seen the accounts. This isn't leadership, it's theft." Silence crashed down like a gavel. Laura whirled on him, eyes blazing. "How dare you?" she hissed. "You betray your family." Derek held his ground. "No, I'm done covering for you. You betrayed this community." His words landed like blows, and the crowd roared its approval. Laura lunged for the tablet, but Mike intercepted, holding it high. "Too late," he said, grinning. "Everyone's already seen it." The realization hit her. Her breath came ragged and shallow. For the first time, the Queen of Oak Ridge looked small and exposed. Before the shouting could peak, the doors burst open. County sheriffs in dark uniforms strode in. The room fell instantly silent, charged with electricity. "Laura Scott," one officer barked, his voice cutting through the din, "step away from the podium. We have a warrant for your arrest." Gasps rolled through the hall. Laura froze, hands hovering near the tablet. My pulse raced, adrenaline surged. This was the turning point, but even then I knew it wasn't the end, only the opening chord of a long reckoning. The sheriffs moved with purpose, boots thudding on tile. The lead officer unfolded a sheet of paper and read aloud, voice steady and unmistakable. "Laura Scott, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of homeowners association funds. You have the right to remain silent." The words landed like a verdict. For a breathless second the community center was suspended in time. Then Laura laughed, a high, frantic sound that fragmented into shrieks as the officers took hold of her arms. Pearls swung, her protests turned thin and shrill, and the woman who'd ruled this neighborhood with a paper fist was hauled away while the room watched, stunned and vindicated. The binder slipped from her grasp and clattered across the floor. "You're making a mistake. I did this for you, for all of you," she screamed at the faces that had once cowered under her rule. But instead of rushing to her defense, they recoiled. A woman near the front stood up and shouted, "You stole from us." A man in the back waved one of the projected spreadsheets, voice raw with anger. "20,000 for playground mulch. My kids never even saw a swing fixed." Voices rose like a tide in accusation after accusation, a chorus of betrayal and outrage. Derek stood apart, fists clenched, pale but steady. Laura spun to him, desperation in her eyes. "Derek, tell them I did it for the community." He didn't flinch, his voice cut through the room, level and sure. "No, Aunt Laura, you did it for yourself." That was the final crack. The last shred of her authority snapped under the weight of his words. She sagged between officers, murmured denials falling away as they guided her toward the door. Watching it unfold, I felt a strange mix of victory and sorrow. A victory because justice had finally arrived, sorrow because it didn't have to end this way. She could have chosen to lead, to protect, to serve. Instead she chose greed and fear. Now, stripped of pearls and binder, she looked Smilith the bully trapped in her own web. Mike leaned close, phone still rolling. "That's going to go viral before the night is over," he whispered. I couldn't help a wry smile. He was probably right. Outside, the sheriff lifted Laura into the back of a cruiser. Neighbors spilled into the street to watch. The flashing lights painted her face as she mouthed one last threat through the tinted window. "You'll regret this, Jake Rogers. You all will regret this." The door slammed shut, the cruiser rolled away, and her voice faded into the night. For the first time in weeks the air felt lighter. The days that followed blurred into a flurry of meetings, statements, and hushed conversations. News of Laura's arrest spread fast. The neighborhood that had once bowed to her now buzzed with outrage and gossip. Families compared notes and discovered how much had vanished under her stewardship. One man found he'd paid nearly $10,000 in roof assessments that never resulted in repairs. Another unearthed duplicate invoices for lawn care that never occurred. Each new discovery drove another nail into the coffin of her reign. Derek surprised everyone by stepping forward with more evidence. He admitted he'd helped file paperwork under pressure but insisted he hadn't known the extent of her schemes until recently. "She told me it was legal," he said at a neighborhood meeting. "When I saw the accounts, I knew it wasn't. I couldn't keep covering for her." His confession earned hesitant nods as some still eyed him with suspicion, because betrayal doesn't melt away in a single afternoon. Still, I respected him in that moment. It takes courage to break free from rotten family ties. Meanwhile, Tracy recovered slowly. When she returned home from the hospital, still tired but smiling at the weight on my chest, teased. Wrapped in a blanket on the porch, she watched the lake glitter in the late afternoon sun. "Looks like the queen lost her crown," she said softly, humor intact. I sat beside her and took her hand. "And she's not getting it back," I replied. For the first time since we moved in, I believed we could finally have the peace we wanted. Mike popped by one evening with sodas, grinning. "The footage is everywhere," he said. "You've got Laura screaming about deserving the money, Derek calling her a thief. People can't stop talking. She's toast." I thanked him. His recordings had been the turning point. Without them, it might have been my word against hers. Now the whole neighborhood had seen the truth. Even as things settled, a new worry gnawed at me. That night at my desk, riffling again through the files Derek had given me, a recurring name kept appearing in footnotes and memos: Maplewood Holdings. It wasn't just Laura's name attached to it. There were other signatures I didn't recognize, references to outside accounts, mentions of regional expansion, and consultants with ties beyond Oak Ridge. The realization hit like a cold wave. Laura had been the queen of this place, but she wasn't acting alone. I closed the laptop and stared out at the dark water, moonlight trembling on the surface. For now, justice had been served. Laura Scott was behind bars and her reign was over. Neighbors were free from her grip. Yet those shadowy files whispered of something larger, something still lurking beyond the borders of our quiet community. Grandma Rose's old words returned to me on the porch. "The lake remembers everything." Maybe she'd been right. Maybe this wasn't finished. Tracy leaned her head on my shoulder. "Our baby safe. Our home finally ours." I made a promise Dana, if Maplewood Holdings tried to reach beyond Oak Ridge, we would be ready. The binder slipped from her grasp and clattered across the floor. "You're making a mistake. I did this for you, for all of you." She screamed at the faces that had once cowered under her rule. But instead of rushing to her defense, they recoiled. A woman near the front stood up and shouted, "You stole from us." A man in the back waved one of the projected spreadsheets, voice raw with anger. $20,000 for playground mulch. My kids never even saw a swing fixed." Voices rose like a tide in accusation after accusation. A chorus of betrayal and outrage. Derek stood apart, fists clenched, pale but steady. Laura spun to him, desperation in her eyes. "Derek, tell them I did it for the community." He didn't flinch. His voice cut through the room, level and sure. "No, Aunt Laura, you did it for yourself." That was the final crack. The last shred of her authority snapped under the weight of his words. She sagged between officers, murmured denials falling away as they guided her toward the door. Watching it unfold, I felt a strange mix of victory and sorrow. A victory because justice had finally arrived, sorrow because it didn't have to end this way. She could have chosen to lead, to protect, to serve. Instead she chose greed and fear. Now, stripped of pearls and binder, she looked smoothly trapped in her own web. Mike leaned close, phone still rolling. "That's going to go viral before the night is over," he whispered. I couldn't help a wry smile. He was probably right. Outside, the sheriff lifted Laura into the back of a cruiser. Neighbors spilled into the street to watch. The flashing lights painted her face as she mouthed one last threat through the tinted window. "You'll regret this, Jake Rogers. You all will regret this." The door slammed shut, the cruiser rolled away, and her voice faded into the night. For the first time in weeks the air felt lighter. The days that followed blurred into a flurry of meetings, statements, and hushed conversations. News of Laura's arrest spread fast. The neighborhood that had once bowed to her now buzzed with outrage and gossip. Families compared notes and discovered how much had vanished under her stewardship. One man found he'd paid nearly $10,000 in roof assessments that never resulted in repairs. Another unearthed duplicate invoices for lawn care that never occurred. Each new discovery drove another nail into the coffin of her reign. Derek surprised everyone by stepping forward with more evidence. He admitted he'd helped file paperwork under pressure but insisted he hadn't known the extent of her schemes until recently. "She told me it was legal," he said at a neighborhood meeting. "When I saw the accounts, I knew it wasn't. I couldn't keep covering for her." His confession earned hesitant nods. Some still eyed him with suspicion, because betrayal doesn't melt away in a single afternoon. Still, I respected him in that moment. It takes courage to break free from rotten family ties. Meanwhile, Tracy recovered slowly. When she returned home from the hospital, still tired but smiling at the weight on my chest eased. Wrapped in a blanket on the porch, she watched the lake glitter and the late afternoon sun. "Looks like the queen lost her crown," she said softly, humor intact. I sat beside her and took her hand. "And she's not getting it back," I replied. For the first time since we moved in, I believed we could finally have the peace we wanted. Mike popped by one evening with sodas, grinning. "The footage is everywhere," he said. "You've got Laura screaming about deserving the money, Derek calling her a thief. People can't stop talking. She's toast." I thanked him. His recordings had been the turning point. Without them, it might have been my word against hers. Now the whole neighborhood had seen the truth. Even as things settled, a new worry gnawed at me. That night at my desk, riffling again through the files Derek had given me, a recurring name kept appearing in footnotes and memos: Maplewood Holdings. It wasn't just Laura's name attached to it. There were other signatures I didn't recognize, references to outside accounts, mentions of regional expansion, and consultants with ties beyond Oak Ridge. The realization hit like a cold wave. Laura had been the queen of this place, but she wasn't acting alone. I closed the laptop and stared out at the dark water, moonlight trembling on the surface. For now, justice had been served. Laura Scott was behind bars and her reign was over. Neighbors were free from her grip. Yet those shadowy files whispered of something larger, something still lurking beyond the borders of our quiet community. Grandma Rose's old words returned to me on the porch. "The lake remembers everything." Maybe she'd been right. Maybe this wasn't finished. Tracy leaned her head on my shoulder. "Our baby safe. Our home finally ours." I made a promise Dana. If Maplewood Holdings tried to reach beyond Oak Ridge, we would be ready. If anyone else came knocking, at any bully, liar, or thief trying to claw their way into power, I was ready. I wasn't just another homeowner anymore. I was the man who stood up to the so-called Queen of Oak Ridge and won. The week after Laura's arrest felt like waking from a storm. The houses still stood, lawns stayed neat, and mailboxes lined the streets, but nothing felt steady. Neighbors walked in small groups, whispering about stolen money and wondering what was next. With Laura gone, the HOA board crumbled like a flimsy house of cards. Half resigned in shame, embarrassed they'd signed off on budgets they never even read. The rest turned on each other, pointing fingers and scrambling to distance themselves from the dethroned queen. I tried to keep a low profile, but it didn't work. Every walk to the mailbox ended with questions. Jake, did you know about the 10 grand for sidewalks? Jake, what's happening with our dues? Jake, can we sue her? I wanted to tell them I wasn't their savior or just a man who refused to bow, but the desperation in their eyes cut deep. They needed someone to prove they weren't powerless. Somehow, I'd become that person. Tracy noticed it before I did. One afternoon, after yet another neighbor came by, she leaned against the porch railing, her smile soft but knowing. They see you as the one who stood up to her, she said. You didn't just protect us, you showed them they could resist too. Don't underestimate that. I rubbed my temples. I don't want to run this place, Tracy. I just want peace. She squeezed my hand. Sometimes peace doesn't come by hiding from the fight. Sometimes you have to lead it. The tension boiled over during an emergency meeting. The board sat behind a folding table. Papers scattered, faces pale. Neighbors packed the seats, shouting over one another. She stole my money. We should press charges, shut it down and dissolve the whole thing. The room crackled with anger and fear. Without the HOA, who would pay for repairs? Who would manage upkeep? Laura's illusion had been so complete that people believed they couldn't live without her even as they realized she had drained them dry. Derek was there, too. He rolled up his sleeves and quietly went to work hauling boxes of Laura's files to the shredder, sorting receipts, even mopping up spilled coffee. Some neighbors muttered traitor under their breath. One woman spat near his shoes. He didn't bite back. He just kept working, jaw tight, trying to prove through action what words couldn't repair. When I handed him a stack of papers, he muttered, I don't expect forgiveness, but maybe I can earn a little trust. Keep showing up, I told him. That'll say more than anything else. Mike, of course, was everywhere with his phone. His clips of Laura's meltdown had gone viral. I can't walk down the street without someone asking for an interview, he bragged on my porch. People love a downfall, and this, man, it's the juiciest HOA drama they've ever seen. I didn't smile. She's gone, but her mess isn't. His grin faltered. You think there's more? I didn't answer, because deep down, I already knew. That night, after Tracy went to bed, I opened Derek's USB. The glow of my laptop lit the kitchen as I scrolled through untouched folders. My pulse climbed. One folder, a regional expansion, caught my eye. Inside work contracts tied to developers 2 towns over, consultants in the next county, and bank transfers in the hundreds of thousands for vague integration projects. It wasn't just Laura's vanity shell. Maplewood Holdings was bigger, spreading beyond Oak Ridge. I printed documents, laying them out across the table. Corporate seals, cryptic memo lines, hidden signatures. One developer's name kept reappearing across 3 counties. Another file listed a strategic growth officer, a title that screamed money laundering. My stomach sank. Laura had been a tyrant here, but she was only a cog in something larger. The next morning, I told Tracy. She listened silently, her hand on her belly, eyes sharp. So this wasn't just about her pearls and tracksuits, she said slowly. It's bigger. I nodded. Much bigger. And if the others get nervous, they might start covering their tracks. She leaned in. Then you'd better decide now. Are you going to sit back, or be ready? Her words stuck like nails. All day the neighborhood argued. Some shouted to dissolve the HOA completely, sick of being cheated. Others demanded new elections, clinging to the hope that rules could still protect them. Mike cracked jokes about community anarchy. Derek stayed quiet, still sorting files no one else wanted to touch. And me, I kept digging. The community still clung to the hope that elections, rules, and structure could protect them. Mike cracked jokes about neighborhood anarchy, while Derek stayed quiet, sifting through files no one else wanted. I couldn't stop thinking about the contracts and names, accounts, and connections that stretched far beyond Oak Ridge. I had defeated Laura, yes, but Maplewood Holdings remained. And if they saw this calm lakeside neighborhood as only a starting point, then their reach was far from over. That night, I stood alone on the dock. The lake lay still beneath the moonlight, rippling softly, mirroring the stars the same way it had when Grandma Rose once whispered to me, "The lake remembers everything." I closed my eyes and answered, "You were right, Grandma, the lake remembers everything." And now, so do I. After Laura's downfall, the neighborhood felt changed, though the houses looked the same. The hedges remained trimmed, sidewalks swept, and the lake gleamed in the morning light. Yet the heavy aura of control that once hung over Oak Ridge was gone. Without Laura stalking the streets like a prison warden, residents seemed relieved but uneasy. At the next informal gathering in the cul-de-sac, voices collided in a storm of questions. Do we still pay dues? What happens to the money already collected? Are we on our own now? Confusion swirled like smoke until, almost instinctively, every eye turned to me. For the first time, I felt the full weight of leadership pressing down, a leadership I had never sought. I steadied myself and spoke calmly. Legally, this house isn't even under the HOA. From what I've seen, most of what Laura did was fraud. If you keep paying dues, the money will only sit in accounts tied to her mess. It's better to wait until this is resolved in court. Murmurs rippled. One man muttered, "She made fools of us." A woman added bitterly, "Years of checks are gone." Their words pierced me even though I hadn't deceived them. It hurt to watch them realize how deep the betrayal ran, and part of me carried guilt for surviving her wrath when so many had been drained for years. Derek stood near the back, arms folded like armor. He looked thinner, more worn than I remembered. When the crowd dispersed, he approached slowly, eyes red as if he hadn't slept in days. In a low voice meant only for me, he said, "There's something you need to know. Laura didn't do this alone. Months ago, she began meeting with strangers, suits, luxury cars. She called them consultants, but I think they were investors. She hid it from the board, even from me. When I pressed her, she told me to shut up and sign papers. That's when I realized she was in too deep." His voice trembled with shame and fear. "Whatever Maplewood Holdings is, it's bigger than her." His words struck me like a stone to the gut. I had suspected, but hearing it confirmed made my pulse race. Laura, arrogant as she was, had never been discreet. If she had backers, that meant others with deeper pockets and darker reach were still out there, people who wouldn't tolerate exposure. Later, I sat at my desk. Derek's files spread before me. The glow of my laptop lit the kitchen table, surrounded by piles of papers and half-empty coffee cups. One folder labeled Expansion Phase 2 caught my eye. Inside were contracts tied to a real estate firm in the next county. The signatures weren't Laura's this time. They belonged to executives with titles like Regional Development Director and Strategic Growth Officer. The figures were staggering, hundreds of thousands earmarked for community integration projects. My gut told me it was just a polished cover for buying influence and HOAs, neighborhood by neighborhood. Tracy joined me at the table, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale but her eyes sharp. I slid the papers to her and explained. She read silently, then sighed. "So Laura wasn't the mastermind," she said slowly. "She was a pawn. They gave her power, and she grabbed it. Now that she's gone," a broken bar. Her voice trailed off, eyes narrowing. "They might look for someone else." Her hand moved protectively to her stomach. I swallowed hard. "Or they might come after me for exposing this." Saying it aloud made the fear real. Tracy leaned closer, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. "Then you need to be smarter than them. Promise me you won't underestimate what you're up against." The next day, Mike stopped by, his usual grin gone. "The videos keep spreading," he said seriously. "Local news called this morning. They want an interview. People are watching. Jake, this isn't neighborhood gossip anymore. It's bigger. Whatever Maplewood Holdings is, the truth will come out." He clapped my shoulder. "But that also puts a target on you. You're not just the guy who stood up to Laura, you're the guy who blew the scam open." For the first time, the lake no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful, like shadows moved just beyond the reeds, waiting. That night, as Tracy slept upstairs, I walked to the dock and stared at the black water. The moon's reflection trembled across the ripples, shattering whenever the wind stirred. Grandma Rose's words echoed in my mind again. "The lake remembers everything." Maybe it remembered the truths waiting to break the surface. Or maybe it remembered the secrets people would kill to bury. The next morning carried a heavier weight. I went through the motions of coffee, checking the porch, flipping through yesterday's mail when something unusual caught my eye. Among the junk flyers sat a plain white envelope, tucked neatly in the mailbox. No return address, just my name in stark block letters across the front. My pulse quickened. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and stared for a long moment before tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature, no flourish, just 7 words in bold black print. Maplewood Holdings isn't finished with you. The room seemed to tilt. I read the line again, then a third time, my hand shaking despite the calm coldness of the message. It wasn't a warning, it was a vow. The words seared themselves into me. Maplewood Holdings isn't finished with you. I sat at the table staring at the paper, the black letters sharp against the white page. My first instinct was to crumple it, throw it in the trash, pretend it didn't exist. But I knew better. Someone had slipped this into my mailbox. Someone wanted me to know I was being watched. This was no longer paranoia. The fight had grown beyond Laura's obsession. Now it bore the fingerprints of something larger. Tracy shuffled into the kitchen, hair tied back, her step slow but steady. She noticed the paper in my hand and froze. "Jake, what's that?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. I slid it across the table. She read it once, then again, her lips pressing into a thin line. "So, it's true," she whispered. "Laura was in the end." Her eyes sharpened. "You need to be careful. Whoever these people are, they don't play by neighborhood rules." I wanted to downplay it, to tell her not to worry, but I couldn't lie. She deserved the truth. "They've got money, power, reach," I said quietly. "If they're moving into other counties, they won't just let me expose them and walk away." Tracy reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Her grip was warm and steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Then be smarter than them. Don't fight head on. Make sure you have proof they can't bury, proof everyone can see." Her words carried the same iron I'd heard when she told her students never to bow to bullies. That afternoon, Mike dropped by. He found me pacing on the porch, the letter folded in my pocket like a hidden weight. "You look like you just saw a ghost," he said, raising a brow. I pulled the note from my pocket and handed it to him. He whistled low as he read it. "Man, this is a new level. HOA drama doesn't usually end with mafia-style threats." He tilted the paper under the light, as if expecting invisible ink. "You should take this to the sheriff." I shook my head. "And then what?" "They'll file it as anonymous harassment and tell me to keep an eye out. That's it. If these people are real, I need more than a deputy's sympathy. I need evidence." Mike frowned. "Then go public. If the neighborhood knows you're being threatened, these guys might back off. Harder to make someone disappear when everyone's watching." I hesitated, my gut twisting. "Or they double down. If they had the power to back Laura, they're big enough not to care about attention." Mike slipped the letter back to me, his face grim. "Fine, but don't sit on this too long. Secrets are what they feed on." Later that evening, Derek appeared at my door. He looked worse than I had ever seen him. Dark circles under his eyes, shoulders stiff, hands trembling slightly. Without small talk, he said flatly, "I heard." I stiffened. "The letter?" He nodded. "Word spreads fast when half the neighborhood is wondering if they're next." Derek sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands before looking up again. "My aunt used to mention someone, never by name, never directly, but when things got tense, she'd say, 'Don't make me call my contact. They'll fix this.' I always thought she was bluffing, but after the USDA broken bar maybe she wasn't." My chest tightened. "You think Laura had a boss?" His jaw clenched. "Not a boss, a protector. Someone who gave her cover, made her feel untouchable. She was terrified of losing their favor. Absolutely terrified." His words sank like stones in my stomach. Laura had ruled Oak Ridge like a tyrant, but even she hadn't been at the top. She hadn't just ruled out of arrogance. Laura had been afraid of someone else. If that was true, then I needed to know who. The rest of the evening dragged in uneasy silence. Tracy lingered in the living room, glancing at me with that mix of love and worry that always twisted something deep in my chest. Mike kept sending texts, updating me on the neighborhood chatter. Some neighbors furious and calling Laura a thief, others still too stunned to process the truth. Derek hovered restlessly, pacing like a cornered animal and muttering about how he should have spoken up sooner. I told him what I believed, that handing me the USB had saved us all, but even as I said it, the shadows pressing in around our small home felt heavier than ever. When the house finally grew quiet, I sat by the window, staring out into the street. The lake shimmered under the moon, deceptively calm. Nothing moved except the trees swaying in the night breeze until I heard the faint rumble of an engine. My chest tightened as headlights crept slowly down the road and stopped. A dark SUV idled at the curb, windows tinted so heavily the driver was little more than a silhouette. My hand gripped the curtain. The vehicle sat there, engine humming low and menacing, its headlights pouring harsh white across my driveway. Sweat pricked the back of my neck. Then, as if deliberate, the SUV rolled forward and stopped directly in front of my house. The growl of its engine seemed to vibrate the porch boards beneath my feet. The headlights cut across the yard, glaring white beams that painted every shadow into stark contrast. It wasn't just a car, it felt like a predator circling. Behind me, I heard soft footsteps. Tracy appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, one hand resting protectively on her belly. The porch light washed her face pale. "Jake," she whispered, her voice tight. "What is it?" I didn't want her to see what I was seeing. Didn't want her to feel this fear. "Stay inside," I said firmly. "Lock the back door. Don't open it for anyone but me." She hesitated, then nodded and vanished back inside, her silhouette swallowed by the warm glow of the living room. I stepped out farther onto the porch, planting my feet as if my stance alone could shield us. The SUV's window hummed as it rolled down halfway. Behind the tinted glass sat a dark figure, posture relaxed in a way that felt intentional, calculated. He didn't move, he didn't speak, he just watched. The silence between us was suffocating, heavier than the humid night air. I could feel him measuring me, deciding whether I was simply an annoyance or a threat that needed to disappear. The SUV edged forward a few feet, then stopped again, circling like a shark in shallow water. Before I could decide whether to step off the porch or call the police, a voice rang out across the street. "Got it all on video." Mike, his unmistakable drawl cut through the tension. He stood on his lawn with his phone raised, the LED light flashing like a beacon. "Smile for the neighbors, buddy," he shouted. Curtains twitched, doors creaked, faces appeared, whispering in the dark. The SUV's brake lights flared, the engine revved as though irritated. For a second, I thought the driver might get out, but then the vehicle lurched forward. Tires screeched, gravel spat, and the SUV roared down the street, disappearing around the bend. The engine's growl lingered in the night air like a warning bell. Mike lowered his phone and strode over, his usual grin replaced by a grim expression. "That wasn't random," he said flatly. "They wanted you to see them. Wanted all of us to." He shoved the phone in his pocket, rubbing the back of his neck. "I've filmed everything so far, but Jakey, this feels different. This isn't some HOA feud. This is bigger." I nodded, jaw clenched. "And they want me to feel powerless." "You're not powerless," Mike snapped. "You've got proof. You've got eyes on you now. That's what scares them." Before I could answer, a knock rattled the door behind me. My stomach twisted as I turned and found Derek on the porch steps. He looked even worse than the night before, his eyes bloodshot, shoulders sagging beneath invisible weight. "They'll be back," he said quietly. I know who that was. His voice cracked as he added, "They're connected to the men my aunt used to meet." She'd say, "Don't make me call my contact. They'll fix this." I thought she was bluffing, but after those files a broken bar, maybe not. Maybe they're real. I searched his face for lies, but all I saw was fear and shame. "You're saying Laura had a boss?" I asked. Derek shook his head. "Not a boss, a protector. Someone who made her feel untouchable. Someone she feared losing more than she ever feared the cops." He swallowed hard. "If they see you as a threat, they won't hesitate to come for you. And because I handed you that USB, I'm marked too." For the first time, I didn't see Laura's enforcer. I saw a man desperate to step out of her shadow. Tracy returned, still wrapped in her blanket, hair disheveled but her eyes sharp with determination. "Then we don't run," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion lingering from the hospital. We fight smart. Laura thought she could intimidate us with fake rules. These people think tinted windows and engines in the dark will shake us. But what they don't realize is we're not alone. She gestured to Mike, who nodded grimly, and then to Derek, who lowered his gaze but didn't move away. They're not just after Jake, they're after all of us. And when we stand together, their power crumbles. Her words hit me like heavy stones, but instead of sinking me, they anchored me. For weeks I'd carried this like it was my private war against Laura, but Tracy was right. This fight had already grown beyond me. The second I refused her demands, when Mike raised his phone, when Derek slipped me the USBA, it stopped being my burden alone. It became the neighborhood's, maybe even bigger, maybe something that stretched far beyond Oak Ridge. 2 days later, the sheriffs returned. Their cruisers rolled in quietly, lights flashing but sirens muted, as though even they didn't want to stir the hornet's nest louder than it already buzzed. I handed them the anonymous letter and described the black SUV. They listened, jotting down notes, faces unreadable. One deputy lingered on the envelope, frowning. "We'll increase patrols," he said. But I caught the hesitation in his eyes. He knew this went deeper than petty neighborhood disputes. As he turned to leave, he leaned close. "You've stirred something bigger than her. If you've got proof, hold on tight. The right people will want it, the wrong people will bury it." His words chilled me more than the night air. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the lake, I gathered with Tracy, Mike, and Derek on the porch. The humidity hung heavy, cicadas buzzing in the trees. Mike tapped his phone against his palm, restless. "We put this out there," he said. "Your deed, the charter error, Laura's meltdown, the Maplewood Holdings file. We bury them in the court of public opinion before they even step inside a courtroom." Derek shook his head. "That'll only make them desperate. These people don't care about neighbors gossiping, they care about power." I rubbed my temples, the weight of both paths pressing down. If we stay silent, they'll think fear works. And I refuse to let that be the story. Tracy leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Then make sure when they come, they find us ready. No more hiding. Jake, you've already proven you won't bow to Laura. Don't start fearing the ones pulling her strings." Her words carried echoes of Grandma Rose's wisdom, sending a shiver up my spine. Later, alone, I sat with the USB again. The tiny rectangle felt as heavy as stone. Inside it were documents showing money flowing through shell companies, neighborhood boards across 3 counties suddenly adopting the same bylaws. The name Maplewood Holdings appeared again and again, attached to polished signatures and vague, official-sounding titles. This wasn't just one woman's greed. It was a machina system built to bleed communities like ours dry. And I had just kicked over one of their pawns. I shut the laptop, walked outside, and stood on the dock. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, ripples glittering against the dark. I thought of Laura, probably still in a cold cell, screaming that she was the victim. I thought of my neighbors, some relieved, others terrified. I thought of Derek, clawing his way out from her shadow. And I thought of the faceless men behind Maplewood Holdings, the ones who believed they could manipulate entire towns from the dark. My fists tightened at my sides, anger and resolve fusing like steel in a forge. That's when I heard it again, the low, deliberate rumble of an engine. My head snapped up, heart pounding. The same black SUV glided into view. Its headlights stayed off this time, its shape almost blending into the night. It stopped in front of my driveway, silent and waiting. The driver's presence pressed against me like a storm building on the horizon. A dark silhouette lingered behind the tinted glass, impossible to make out. My throat tightened as the engine cut off, plunging everything into a silence so heavy it felt like the night itself was holding its breath. The SUV door groaned as it opened, and in that instant, I knew the battle was nowhere near finished. The HOA war hadn't truly ended. It had simply pulled back the curtain on something larger, something darker that still casts its shadow over Oakwood Heights. And yet, justice tasted sweeter because it wasn't just my fight anymore. It belonged to all of us who chose to stand shoulder to shoulder. That's the kind of story we share here on Anadrama Nesta. Real conflicts, real stakes, and resolutions that make you want to cheer. If this one struck a chord, hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. And if this made you think, no way, that really happened, then give it a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more from Mana Drama Nest.